Hello, friends. Thanks for tuning in. Great show for you this week. But before I introduce the guest, as always, please follow, subscribe, rate, and review the show. Really helps the show get a boost, grow the audience, and ultimately grow the podcast, which is what I want to do so I can get the best guests out there and the biggest names and have the most awesome conversations and the most insightful conversations possible. So I need your help for that. Additionally, please go follow me on social media. On Instagram, it's ROYBTZ. And Twitter, it's ROY_BNTZ. Now, if you go to Twitter or if you go to Instagram, there is a link tree that you can find the newsletter on Twitter. It's just at the top of the page. On Instagram, you have to go through Linktree. But please go subscribe to the newsletter. It gives you access to updates, occasional blog posts, news about the guest and future of the show. And most importantly, it's just the easiest way for you to get the podcast conveniently in your inbox week in and week out. Finally, please consider supporting the podcast. This podcast is completely independent. I made the decision not to work with any sponsors on this specific show. I want to be independent. Additionally, I also don't like when there's too many ads, especially in the middle of the podcast, which is something that a lot of sponsors are asking for. I just feel like it breaks up the rhythm of the show, and I don't like doing it. So this podcast is always going to be independent, ad-free. I hope you consider supporting it for the amount of a cup of coffee. You can support this independent podcast. Lastly, if starting a podcast is something you're interested in, I recently released a full tutorial that covers everything you need to know, soup to nuts, A to Z, 1 to 100, everything you need to know about starting, growing, executing, marketing, reaching out to guests, just everything, a complete tutorial when it comes to starting your own podcast. And I think it's amazing to start a podcast. And I think this really covers everything. It's everything I've learned over the past couple of years, jam-packed into one ebook. And I think you're going to love it. So if you're interested in starting a podcast, feel free to check it out. Links in the show notes. All right, on to the guest this week. My guest this week is Blake Flayton. Blake is a columnist and new media director for Jewish Journal. He's the co-founder of the new Zionist Congress. He has written for Tablet Mag, Times of Israel, and many more. But more than anything, he is a fearless voice speaking out against the hypocrisy that we're seeing against Israel. And at 21, to be so vocal, so fearless, so firm in his stance, and to be able to explain so eloquently why he is in fact on the right side of justice and why so many of the issues we're seeing right now are nonsensical, not rooted in science or common sense, and need to be challenged. I'm glad there's someone like Blake who is able to speak up and perhaps reach a younger demographic than maybe some of the other people in the space. But regardless, great conversation. I enjoyed every minute of it. We definitely talked a lot about Israel, a lot about what's happening currently in the United States with left-wing, right-wing, news media, a little bit of COVID. And just, we were trying to make sense of this crazy times that we're all living in with COVID and with social issues and with disinformation from media. But I think the main topic that we covered is definitely anti-Semitism in the United States and Israel and some of the propaganda against Israel, how we can hopefully cut through this smoke screen of nonsense that is perpetrated against Israel on a daily, hourly, minute-by-minute basis. So we really did our best to make sense of everything, to give you as much information as possible, and to, inject a little bit of humor into it from now and then, not to make the whole thing too heavy. But it is a serious topic. It is a serious issue. Anti-Semitism is definitely on the rise, so it needs to be addressed. And I hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. And let's move on to the podcast. Let me introduce this week's guest, Blake Flayton. Enjoy the podcast, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
Blake, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah. So you're, as we talked a little bit before we started recording, you're in New York right now, right?
Yes, coming to you live from COVID-ridden Manhattan.
Yeah, I saw some crazy stat yesterday. 25% of all COVID cases are in New York right now.
Yeah, it's actually a little bit insane. If you are looking for a way to get COVID, you might as well you might as well either come to New York. And if you're in New York and you're looking to get COVID, you should stand online with the people waiting to get tested, because odds are that somebody either in front of you or behind you actually has COVID and they will breathe on you. So it's a great way to pick up the virus. Yeah.
How are people still like, what's it like on the ground? Like, can you go into places? Do you have to wear masks? Is the subway working? Do you have to, because it's winter. It's not like in the summertime, people were eating outside, although it was still indoors, but it was technically outside, which was very weird. But
That's
what's
right.
the situation like now?
The situation is kind of fun. I mean, there's a whole group of people who don't want to leave their apartments. I am not one of those people.
Yeah.
I am fine leaving my apartment. I have not gotten COVID yet, Baruch Hashem, but I am actually, this might sound weird to some listeners, but I'm actually in a state where I don't mind getting COVID, considering every friend that I've had who's picked up this particular variant has had nothing worse than a common cold for a couple of days. That's just kind of made them a little bit groggy. And so if that's the price to pay to continue on with my winter as normal, as I did all summer, then that's okay. But, bars are open, movie theaters are open. The subway is running slower. There's delays on the subway because a lot of conductors have COVID, and Broadway shows are closing down. It just depends which one you see, because some are open, some are closed. So it's kind of a half and half situation in the city right now.
Yeah, I feel like if this would be happening in Texas or Florida, the narrative of how this would be framed would be extremely different, right? Because New York is pretty pro-mask, pretty pro-vaccine. Majority of people are vaccinated, yet still it's running rampant. If this was in one of the redder states, the story would be completely different, right?
Oh, well, didn't you know if a Republican gets COVID, it's obviously because he wasn't following safety protocols and not socially distancing and not wearing a mask. When a Democrat gets COVID, it's not a moral failure. And don't worry, we'll bring you soup. We'll bring you matzo ball soup from Katz's. Everything's okay. I mean, that's kind of an abstraction. But no, you're absolutely right. When blue states have a surge of COVID, it's very much like the apocalypse is coming. It's a crisis. People don't know what to do. But when red states get COVID, blue states love feeling that moral superiority of, oh, well, it's because we're safer with masks and stuff. This millimeter of fabric around my face is protecting me. Right. Regardless of what I do in New York City, like get on a subway where 1,000 people have sneezed on the handrail I'm currently touching. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even restaurants. Like I go into restaurants, and now in Denver, which is where I currently reside, they switched. So they made masks mandatory a few weeks back. And you go into a bar, right? Or a restaurant, whatever. You have to wear a mask upon entering. So you're standing with all these other people.
But not when you're eating, right?
Correct. but when you go to the bar and you sit with all these other strangers, no mask. When you go into the table and you sit next to all these other strangers, no mask. Like, well, and this goes back to what you were saying also about media. It's just like, I would love for us to get to have more of a common sense approach here and just be a bit more objective rather than, I don't know, it's not as binary as left, right, blue, red, blue, red. Yeah. It's just be objective. Give us facts. Just stop fucking with us.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I had naive hope at the beginning of 2020 that COVID would be this kind of unifier, and the country would look in the face of a pandemic and realize that we're all in this together and understand that we all have to take the measures necessary to beat it back. But of course, it was politicized because it's not possible for anything in this country to not be politicized. So of course, we, divvied off into our tribes and started screaming at each other to the public's own health detriment. I'm not surprised, but I am kind of exhausted from it. I know that's not a particularly hot take. A lot of people are exhausted from COVID. I haven't taken the red pill on COVID, but I am tired of the bickering and the discourse, and the grandstanding and the virtual signaling and all of the horrible things other than COVID that are wrapped up in COVID.
Why do you think that is? Why? Because I'll be honest, I think even in Israel, and granted, I haven't been there for a while, but from what I'm hearing from friends and family, it's also kind of divided. Like I remember in Israel, whenever there'll be wars or, moments of terror, the country comes together, right? Like everyone's your brother all of a sudden. And for the most part, that's kind of true to an extent, but it's definitely enhanced in moments of pain and terror. And I'm pretty sure back in in 9/11, this was the same thing here in the US and probably throughout, again, events that happened. But it seems like, I don't know what the reason is. I don't know if it's social media. I don't know if it's just the political climate that we're in. But COVID just seems to have fractured what was before something that would bring everyone together.
Well, I think Trump is a lot to blame for that. I think Trump began 2020 and kind of into February and March calling it a hoax. Mm-hmm. And so when it appeared to, in fact, not be a hoax, I think Democrats obviously harbored some deserved and justified resentment against him for downplaying it and for attacking Dr. Fauci. I'm not a fan of Dr. Fauci, but Trump's attacking of Dr. Fauci in the early days of the pandemic definitely set the tone that there was going to be a rift between the White House and what the bureaucrats of public health, the experts, shall we say, of public health were saying. So that obviously created some tension. In regards to tension of the vaccine and politics over whether or not it's safe, that always sort of threw me for a loop, because the people who are a little bit more skeptic and mistrusting, shall we say, tend to be on the right, or at least the media likes to portray them as being on the right. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's not always true, because people of color also have higher than the general public vaccine hesitancy as well. But it always confused me because Trump led the effort in a way to, he led Operation Warp Speed to get the vaccine. Yeah. So that always seemed to me like something that he should be championing, and that's something that he should be acknowledging as a really great success of his administration. And then just recently, a couple of days ago, I think he was being interviewed by Bill O'Reilly, and he was booed for saying that he was boosted. And then again on Candace Owens, he said that people aren't dying from the vaccine, which of course caused this uproar and this crisis of identity in conservative circles that I just thought was completely ridiculous. But again, I think it has to do with Trump. It has to do with Biden. The Democrats also were looking for the anti-Trump messaging throughout the COVID crisis. And so they went overboard on masking, which I'm very skeptical to believe works or has any benefit whatsoever. Vaccines, which we were right to be hawkish on and bullish on. Mm-hmm. I am boosted now, which is why I'm not so worried about COVID-19. And then just the mandates obviously became a political question, because of course they were a political question. You're imposing a requirement on the public to do and go certain places and do certain things. So of course that's going to ruffle the more libertarian feathers. But it's a clusterfuck any way you look at it. It's a dumpster fire, and I'm really looking forward to an era where nobody is talking about this anymore.
Well, it's funny. The same people that are championing masks and vaccine now were anti-masks and anti-vaccines when Trump was in power. Like they literally put out videos that, why would you take this? Would you take this? Like, we don't know if this is safe, and all these, and Fauci was
Kamala Harris said that on record. She said that I'm not taking it if Trump oversees the process of developing the vaccine, which was a horrific thing to say, but here we are.
And then when they get into power, they all of a sudden champion vaccines, and it's the best thing you have to do. And then what's her name? Maddow from MSNBC. She was
Rachel,
saying, earlier this year, that if you are vaccinated, it essentially you're immune. Like you're not going to catch it and you can't spread it. Now we know that. So it's it's so much misinformation and disinformation. And look, if you're an average Joe, right? You have to get to work. You have to pay your mortgage. You have to take care of the kids. You have to feed your. There's you don't have the bandwidth to consume all this information and try to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And that's
right.
top.
And remember, last May, Biden infamously sitting on the desk of the Oval Office said, if you're double vaxxed, you can now take off your mask in any and all settings. And then now here we are where we're being encouraged to mask again. I'm very, very pro-vaccine, very anti-mask. Let's just say that.
Yeah, and I'm not, maybe I'm coming off as some crazy conservative. I'm not conservative. I'm not liberal. I am politically homeless. I do not belong to any group.
Me too, brother. Me too.
All right, cool. So we went right into the deep end right away.
Yes, we sure did.
I want the listeners to maybe learn a little bit more about you, your background. Maybe can you give us a little bit of, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Of course. Hi, everybody. A formal introduction after 10 minutes of kibitzing on COVID. Listen, that's a Jewish introduction if there ever was one. Hi, everyone. My name is Blake Flayton. I am a 21-year-old person living in New York City. I am originally from Phoenix, Arizona. I was born and raised there. I went to college at George Washington University. And through all of high school and through the majority of college, I considered myself a progressive activist, a progressive thinker, very excited to champion the causes of the left, very passionate about making sure that Democrats win as many and as much elections as possible. During my college experience, I encountered some vehemently anti-Israel and what I believe to be anti-Semitic attitudes and rhetoric coming out of the spaces, coming out of the corners of which I'd always regarded as my ideological home. And that led me toward a sort of crisis of identity where I found myself disagreeing with people who were on my side of the aisle about a variety of things, but Israel was always kind of the linchpin and the starter for me that led me to start thinking differently. And I started speaking publicly about it. I started writing and talking and advocating against anti-Semitism on college campuses and drawing attention to the problem, and also getting into the more of the weeds of what the problem specifically is and why we're dealing with it and what are the best solutions to combat it. And so I was a freelance writer for a while. I wrote for The Forward, Haaretz, The New York Times, Allgemeiner, Tablet, et cetera, The Bulwark. And right now I am I'm a weekly columnist and the new media director over at Jewish Journal, which is an LA newspaper. And I've been doing that since I graduated college in August of 2021. And I also in 2021 started my own organization called the New Zionist Congress, which since March has been doing online programming and online events. And we seek to empower the next generation of Zionist leaders to be confident in their pro-Israel activism and also to fight back against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in whatever space they find it. So that's kind of the rundown.
Dude, you're a very busy 21-year-old.
I'm a very busy 21-year-old. One could argue very too busy, but we're making things work.
How are you able to, because I looked on the website, I went on the New Zionist Congress website, you were able to recruit pretty impressive board, right? Barry Weiss, Tishby, Einat Wolf, who I had on the podcast, and I love talking to her.
Yes.
How did you manage to get some of these great people?
Well, we just asked, one of the many wonderful things about the Jewish community is when there is this sort of energy surrounding a noble, worthy cause, such as the New Zionist Congress, there are a variety of thought leaders and activists and important people within the space that are willing to lend their support and that are willing to lend their name to help us gain popularity. And so we just asked, and we also, many of us at NZC, myself included, have relationships with people like Noah and Einat and Barry. And we're comfortable, widening the circle to include some of these important names.
Yeah. What was it like growing up Jewish in, you said Phoenix, Arizona, right? I would imagine pretty small to non-existent Jewish community there, right?
You'd be incorrect. Phoenix had...
I'm quite often incorrect. It's fine.
No, me too. But I will say that growing up in Phoenix, we had a very vibrant, large Jewish community. Really? Yes, and it's mainly all transplants from the East Coast. So most of the Jews, and not all of the Jews that I grew up with in Arizona, were Jews like my family who were from New York, Jersey, wherever on the East Coast, and then moved to Arizona when it was becoming an up-and-coming metropolis in the 90s and early 2000s. That's my family's story. But growing up there was completely normal. We weren't super religious. We did take a lot of pride in the community itself and spend a lot of time at like social events and synagogue events with the community and making family friends that way. We only really went to synagogue twice a year for the high holidays, but I went to Hebrew school. Of course, I was bar mitzvahed. I went to Hebrew High in high school, which was sort of an after-school program at our local Jewish community center. I went to summer camp in Oregon growing up, which had I didn't realize it at the time, but it had a very profound impact on recognizing and understanding my Jewish identity, because at this summer camp in Oregon that I went to for a month/month and a half every summer, I met lots of Israelis. It was a very Zionist camp. And so I met lots of Israelis. They were my counselors. They were my friends. They were administrators on the campgrounds. And so I loved them, and I loved Israeli culture, and I loved learning about Israel and talking about Israel. And that became a huge part of my childhood, but only became a point of contention and only became something that I really cared about when I encountered opposition to that culture.
And that was in college?
And that was in college. But other than that, I had a very standard Reform Jewish childhood.
So like you said, like you were very progressive. And I'm assuming you still are on many things. But then college comes around and you start seeing that, oh, while I have this group that I pretty much agree with on a lot of issues, this one issue, they are just completely opposed to the way I think and the way I see things. Why go there? You know, like I've heard you say maybe on a podcast somewhere that it's a thankless job to be an advocate for Israel.
Yeah.
And many people don't do it. You're right. They're not looking for the hate. They're not looking for the online slander. They're not looking to sometimes physical violence, you know, as we've seen in New York and in some other places. Why do it? Why pursue it if you know you're going to get that kind of backlash?
I think that I am so passionate about it that I would be miserable if I wasn't doing it. I think that all of the baggage that comes with standing up for Israel in the town square, if you will, and all of the consequences, the social consequences, the professional consequences, they all pale in comparison to the emptiness that I would be feeling if this wasn't something that I was championing, if this wasn't something that I was constantly talking and writing about. I look at what happened in the United Kingdom with Jeremy Corbyn and the rise of anti-Zionism in the halls of power, and how close that anti-Semitic way of thinking came to being in charge and calling the shots in a liberal democracy. And that really terrified me to my core. And I understood just how serious of an issue this is and how insidious of an issue this is and how it can kind of take over the left wing. And believe it or not, the left wing is actually something that I very much still care about because, as you said, I'm still progressive. Excuse me, there's a police siren.
Oh, that's the ambiance of New York.
That's the ambiance of New York. That's right. But I still very much care, as you said, about progressive policies and about a left-wing frame that government can operate in. And so it is very important to me. I want to save it from itself, if that makes sense. And also, I just feel passionate about Israelis. I feel passionate about the story of our people. I'm very passionate about the Shoah and Holocaust education and working to make sure that anti-Semitism in our own day and age is combat it as successfully as possible. And a part of that is standing up for Israel, because as we've seen, animosity toward Israel very often coincides with animosity and demonization of whatever diaspora Jewish community as well.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about Israel. I have a lot to say and a lot to ask as well. But what's the atmosphere like on campuses right now? Because in general, I'm never really been on a U.S. campus. I haven't been on a campus in many years. But what I'm seeing online is it's extremely politically charged right now. And obviously, there's a few key issues that they feel very passionate about: Israel, Palestine. There's also a lumping of a few things that I don't know if they're necessarily connected in any way, shape, or form, but they seem to be just lumped in. But yeah, maybe you could give us a little bit of insight as to what the atmosphere is like now.
Yeah, so it depends on the campus, really. I went to George Washington University, which sort of has a reputation, and it's a deserved reputation because the rumors are true, with a very politically charged student body. This is a student body that obviously is comprised of young people, and young people, especially in 2021, are going to be disproportionately quite a bit more left-wing than the general public. So it's a very left-wing, very politically charged atmosphere where the starkest deviations really exist between people who are already on the left-hand side of the political spectrum and just moderates versus progressives, and then how progressive are you, et cetera, et cetera. And so I thought that environment originally was going to be great for me because I would be able to develop my, ideology in a more mature, academic, intellectual way. And then I'd be able to go into work into politics and everything would be great. It turns out it was detrimental, or maybe not. Maybe it's the opposite. It did help inform my political ideology, just not in the way that I thought it would be. Because the atmosphere on campus for Jewish people, especially at a school like GW, is very clear. And what it says is that supporting Israel's right to exist is a non-starter if you want to get involved in these left-wing spaces. Zionism is racism. Zionism is colonialism. Zionism is imperialism. Zionism is sort of indicative of all of the terrible things wrong in this country, including but not limited to police brutality, capitalism, the prison industrial complex, which is just ridiculous. Yeah. And also, oppression of LGBT people, oppression of indigenous people, misogyny, homophobia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that ties into what you said about, this issue of anti-Zionism being lumped in with other issues. Organizations on campus like SJP, which stands for Students for Justice in Palestine, and JVP, which stands for Jewish Voice for Peace, who are sort of the ringleaders at passing BDS resolutions and deadly exchange resolutions and whipping up sentiment against Israel on campus. They are also keen on the strategy of using the weapon of intersectionality to get as many progressive groups on campus to disavow Israel and to also separate themselves from Jewish communal life on campus. Yeah. What that means is environmental organizations on campus, calling Zionism racism and saying that Israel is an apartheid state, completely unprovoked. What that means is at my own campus, the largest LGBT organization writing in their bylaws that they would not partner with Hillel, the largest Jewish organization on campus, because it was in support of Israel and because it was a Zionist institution. So automatically you get this web of hostility, this web of animosity. And when we pull back the lens, when we zoom out, we see that this is how anti-Semitism has always operated. It pushes Jews out of the spaces. It makes Jews uncomfortable in the spaces in which they were once welcomed. And that's what a lot of Jews are dealing with on campus, especially, as I said, those more politically charged campuses. And if you're a progressive Jew and you're Zionist, you are quickly led to believe that Zionism and progressivism are incompatible and that they are at odds with each other, and that you have been brainwashed by your community into accepting otherwise, and you need to go through teshuvah of repenting for this support for Israel, and you need to, if not become a anti-Israel activist, a pro-Palestinian activist, then you at least receive signals to not talk about Israel in public, to separate yourselves from the Zionists who are advocating for Israel because they have been branded with the worst labels imaginable. They have been smeared on social media. They have been impeached from their positions on student governments. Campus life has been difficult for them. And so you receive signals to just not engage and to just pipe down whenever controversy with Israel and anti-Semitism gets brought into the spotlight. So it's difficult. It is very difficult. There's a lot of moving parts. But I think what we have to do now is support Jewish students in any way we can.
I have so many thoughts about everything you just said. I don't even know where to start. For me, honestly, many things drive me crazy because I just know how convoluted and false and detached from reality they are. But the apartheid thing is just so stupid. It drives me insane. The number, first of all, for some reason, no one knows what the MENA Jews are. Like that's never discussed. And on top of that, the number of Jews in Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran is under 10,000 out of 250 million people. Number of Arab citizens in Israel is, I think, under 2 million with full civil rights. I can't even imagine what it's like being a Jew in Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, all those other countries. Full civil rights. They serve everywhere. They're doctors, lawyers, everything that you can think of. But that's the apartheid state? Are you insane? What we're living in fantasy world right now. But Jews here also have the the privilege, air quotes, to be hated and targeted by many groups of different sides of the political spectrum. Which one worries you more? Is it the right on the fringe, or is it the left that is becoming a little bit more mainstream from what I'm seeing?
Well, I don't,
or both.
I don't view anti-Semitism, right-wing anti-Semitism and left-wing anti-Semitism as sort of two opposing forces that challenge each other in the arena of politics, and they have become a little bit closer, complementing each other more and more with time. Right. I believe that the anti-Jewish bigotry that we are seeing on the left and the right are both evidence and both indicative of the same problem. And that same problem is when people in this country accept populist political messaging that replaces facts and truth and reason with conspiracy theories, blaming, finger pointing, and general animosity and grievance toward liberal democratic institutions. That is a recipe for Jew hatred in whatever country, in whatever society, in whatever civilization you find yourself in. When people grow frustrated with their economic or social situation, when there is public mistrust in institutions, and when there is a calamity such as the coronavirus, such as income inequality, such as climate change, again, I will say the fingers start pointing, and time after time after time, Jews or an abstraction of the Jews find themselves on the other side of that, of that pointing finger. The image of us becomes whatever a given ideology deems as evil, whatever a given ideology deems as what's standing in the way between us and a brighter, more prosperous future. So to the right, we take the form of, the New York liberal, the Hollywood elite, the globalists, the cosmopolitan, the bankers, but that also is on the left as well.
Exactly.
And then the left is the Zionists, the racists, the white people, the elite also, the capitalists, the landlords, the bankers as well.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of the same cesspool. We're dealing with the same virus. And although it manifests itself differently, where the left, it obviously comes out, not always, because I also believe the left showed their true colors when they failed to say anything about when Jews are attacked in places like New York by people who do not look and sound like white supremacists. But, obviously the left, it's more closely associated with anti-Israel prejudice, whereas the right, it sometimes can be, philo-Semitic in its support of Israel. But it's the same discursive swamp as Anthony Julius once described anti-Semitism as.
There is, the other thing is that you, as an American Jew, not even an Israeli citizen or a taxpayer or anything.
Yeah.
The fact that you have to defend Israel's right to exist. I don't understand. Like, there's no other country where people are debating the right of that country to exist.
Right.
Right. And when you're saying it doesn't have a right to exist, what are you actually saying by that? Like, if you really what are you saying? Are you saying you're going to kill all the 8 million Jews that live in Israel? Are you saying you're going to have to move them back to East Europe, where before it didn't really pan out that well, if we remember history? Like, when people are saying, river to the sea and all these, what are you actually saying? And so I guess there's two questions. I don't know if people fully understand, or maybe they do and they don't want to admit it, what they're actually saying when they say these things. And the other is why you, and not only you specifically, but generally you as an American Jew, why are you lumped together with Israel? You're not an Israeli citizen, right? But you are hated if you're not on board this new progressive agenda of anti-Israel.
First of all, I totally agree with your first assertion. I think that I have a problem with the term pro-Israel, or with the phrase pro-Israel, because we don't say that about any other country,
exactly.
Right? Israel is the only country that is fashioned to be a political stance, as in, if you support this entity existing at all, then you are falling on one side or the other of the political spectrum, which it's not a thing for any other country. We don't say, I'm pro France, I'm pro Thailand, I'm pro Libya. We might have opinions about what happens in those countries and the policies that are initiated in those countries, but it's just accepted as a part of life that those places exist. And why would you advocate for the dissolution of that political construct that is, unless, of course, you're some far left activist who doesn't believe in borders or nation states at all. That's sort of the only way you can advocate against Israel's existence that doesn't come across as particularly bigoted against the Jewish people, in my personal opinion. In regards to why I'm lumped together with Israel, I've done a good job of doing that myself and associating my brand and my activism and my voice with Israel. But you're correct in saying that, American Jews who don't make a point to disavow Israel and to disavow Zionism in general are sort of marked, at least on the left, with these demonizing labels that make it clear that we are not welcome in these spaces, that our ideas and our identities are not accepted in these spaces, which can be very challenging. And listen, political homelessness is the rule, not the exception of Jewish history, but that doesn't at all take away the sting that Jews like myself feel sometimes when we realize that, in such a polarized society where people find comfort and reassurance in people who affirm their political priors, we don't have that, or we have to look harder to find that. And I think that has to do with Israel, yes, because the left is against Israel. But I also think more broadly, it has to do with Jewish particularism itself, because we don't fit in easily into their constructed boxes of, oppressor versus oppressed, white versus non-white, marginalized versus not marginalized, we have a lot of contradictions that make up the DNA of our people. We appear white. A lot of us do, especially in the United States, appear white, and yet we are targeted by white supremacists. We have a story of economic immobility and tenement homes, one of which I'm living in now. I live on the Lower East Side, and immigration, and yet we are successful and disproportionately represented at a lot of really important institutions like law and science and Nobel Prize winners, and so the left doesn't really know what to make of us in this era of hyper identity politics. And as Jordan Peterson will say, postmodern neo-Marxism, and so I think a lot of the animosity we face and the attachment to Israel is an excuse that comes from that frustration as to like, oh, this is a square peg and there's, there's a lot of round holes.
Yeah, it's true, man. I mean, I don't know any other country that is as politicized. And I can go into many personal examples and non-personal examples as well. But I remember a few years back, I was walking through Washington Square Park. It just happened.
Big fan. Might go today. Yeah.
I lived right next to it. So I used to walk my dogs there a lot. And it just, if I'm not mistaken, it was Israeli Independence Day. So, there were a few Israelis and Jews and they had a little, at the end of the park, not even where like the fountain is, just like on the other side where it's not as busy. They were having a little party. Maybe even there was like a DJ or something. And they were just celebrating, right? As any country does. So I'm like, oh, that's nice. I go over with the dogs. And what I see like a little mini protest / sit down happening by some anti-Israel. And they're just, they have their sign. And I was just like, why can't you just let these people celebrate? There were maybe 100 people there just having a good time, but that doesn't happen with Japan or with Switzerland or with any other country, right? And every country's no one's perfect. The U.S. is far from perfect. We can go on forever about the things the U.S. has done. Every country's done stuff. That's just human history. We're not perfect. We've all done stuff. It just irks me that this one country is just politicized till infinity and till oblivion, just nonstop.
Yeah. I mean, it's how anti-Semitism has always operated. It's taking something that is associated with Jews, that is associated with Jewish culture, and toxifying it, making it toxic in the public square, making it controversial, making Jews afraid to embrace it, making Jews afraid to champion it, making the public weary of accepting it. It's just these slowly pushing norms and staples of Jewish culture and Jewish peoplehood out of what scholar David Hirsch calls the community of the good, right? Out of respected spaces, out of spaces where people are okay with hearing each other's different points of view.
Yeah. And, growing up in Israel, when you travel abroad, there's a consensus, there's a knowledge that you should hide your identity. Doesn't matter if it's Amsterdam or Paris or Thailand or Ghana, any country you go to, really with the exception of the US, which I don't know if there's a shift there happening recently, but pretty much with the exception of the US, any country you're encouraged to say that, you're from Romania or the US or Portugal or Morocco, whatever, right? Whatever your background is and whatever you feel comfortable saying and whatever you look like that could fit that mold. But, and Israelis, they don't love it, but it's like, all right, cool. Like, yeah, we know this. Whereas I think if that were to happen here in the US, if they were to tell you, hey, like when you travel, like don't say who you are, hide your identity, they would lose their minds. No, my identity, like I don't think they would be able to compartmentalize and rationalize why they have to do this. But in Israel, it's common practice and it's fine. And now when I'm in the US after many years here, I think I'm like, why the fuck do I need to do that? Actually, I actually don't want to do that. It's fine. Like I will do it because it's just safety first. But I think the majority of people across the world don't have to deal with this. And it's not a thing that's even discussed because I've never heard anybody really talk about it. And just a thought. Yeah.
I mean, it's just the things that Israelis have unfortunately have had to accept that is no fault of their own. it's a hand that they've been dealt that they've just have had to live with in traveling to places like Europe, especially if they're Israelis, who are visible Jews who wear kippot and talit. And that's not exclusive to Israelis. There are Jews in Paris who can't leave the house without putting a baseball hat over their yarmulke. Obviously, that is happening all over Europe as well. And things are changing, unfortunately, in the United States, where more and more people in New York and places like New York, LA, big liberal cities, not, small town conservative places, but big liberal cities that pride themselves on, being the melting pot of the salad bowl, the blend of American life. These Jews are finding it harder to present themselves to the world as Jews and are taking steps to hide their identities more and more, especially after the wave of violence and grievance that we saw against our community in May of 2021, which was a very scary time for me and others, other Jews, many who were texting me and saying things like, for the first time ever, I'm afraid to be a Jew in this country, or I'm afraid to tell people that I'm Jewish. And for an Israeli Jew, that's probably 10 times more intense, because although no one knows you're Israeli right away, especially in the spring, you don't want to be going around telling people that you're Israeli. Yeah. And that's unfortunately a problem that's followed our community for centuries and doesn't show any signs of going away soon.
Why don't the LGBT, because we were talking about lumping things together, right? Like climate change with BLM, with, Palestinian issues, with LGBT, all these things that have nothing really to do with one another, but somehow they're lumped in because they're part of these progressive ideologies, many of which I also agree with. But why are LGBTQ groups anti-Israel? It makes no sense. That's literally the only LGBTQ-friendly country in the Middle East. There's no other country that's friendly or there's marches or anything else, but they are anti-Israel, which is weird.
I mean, yeah, it looks weird at face value, but once you investigate, which I would advise against, by the way, because I don't recommend getting involved in the politics of any LGBTQ community. We're very dramatic, very annoying people. I'll say that a lot of LGBT groups in Europe and in the United States have taken on a very far left lens in which to view the world. And that lens says, as I discussed before, that the world can be easily divided between oppressor and oppressed, colonizer and colonized, white versus non-white, Western versus not Western. And in this worldview, this post-colonial, this worldview that was informed by things like post-colonial theory, by critical race theory, Israel is viewed as powerful and as white and as imposing apartheid and as
which they're not white, by the way.
Right. And right. The majority of Israel is in fact not white, but that doesn't matter to these people, to these groups. And they get annoyed because they see this oppressive ruling country that is using their preferential treatment to LGBT people as a distraction against the horrors that they're committing against the Palestinian people, which is, of course, where the phrase pinkwashing comes from. Yeah.
Can you explain what pinkwashing is to people who may not know?
Yeah. So essentially what I just said. So pinkwashing is the accusation that Israel uses their better than most or better than all other Middle Eastern countries' treatment of queer people. They use that as an excuse when faced with accusations of oppression or persecution of Palestinians. So they say, we're this big liberal democracy. How can we be in apartheid? How can we be carrying out regressive, terrible policies when look how great that we treat gay people? And, if you're following that line of thinking, one could understand why LGBT groups are against Israel, because they feel exploited by Israel, by the Israeli government, and they feel taken advantage of. However, it's a completely bogus and completely flawed way of thinking, because how it's used is to push Jews out of gay and lesbian and trans spaces, if they just happen to believe in Israel's right to exist. In theory, pinkwashing takes issue with a Western democracy using their treatment of gay people to cover up their treatment of Palestinians. But in practice, it's just used to exclude gay people, to deny Jewish gay people the right to express their full identities unapologetically and to feel national pride along with pride with, their group sexual orientation. And it's just, it's also, lots of countries, it is placing Israel under an unfair microscope. It is holding Israel to unfair double standards. And it's also just a joke because, as you said, Israel is surrounded by the most oppressive, repressive countries toward our community possible on planet Earth. And yet Israel is being specifically targeted and blamed by this group. And I think it's evidence that the Jews and our perception of privilege and whiteness and power irritates people, and they don't know what to do with us.
So there's no winning. If Israel says, hey, come, let's do LGBTQ month, let's, all the progressive things you want, then it's pinkwashing. If they say, hey, no, you're not going to be able to do demonstrations, you're not going to be able to be gay in this country, then they'll say, oh, how oppressive the Israeli government is. Here, this proves our point. So there's really no winning. Whatever you do, it's a lose-lose.
Exactly. Which lets you know that it's really not about Israel. It's more about Jews.
Are progressives cannibalizing themselves?
Absolutely.
If you don't meet the exact criteria, and if you're not bored with everything, and it keeps changing, right? Like every week there's something new. Like you can't keep up with it. And if not, you're canceled, you're ousted, you're out of the group. And it's all nuance has been completely eliminated, and you have to stick to the script. Otherwise, you're a Nazi right away, which is ironic, but that's beside the point. But they are losing very influential and smart and charismatic people like yourself, like Barry Weiss, like, even higher up, right? Joe Rogan, who now he's apparently a right winger, which he's not at all. They're losing like really influential people. And I just feel like they are cannibalizing themselves.
100%. I mean, any political community that imposes this sort of ideological rigidity, where nuance is not allowed, or anyone who believes in the gray area or in compromise is not allowed, you're going to see that movement, that community hemorrhage support and hemorrhage people who would otherwise feel welcome. And you gave some examples there, but I think that the Jewish community is represented in those people who are wayward left-wing people. And it's because of the Israel issue, but also because we feel choked and silenced in this, environment where there is an obsession with identity and with marginalization and with oppression, and how far, oppression Olympics, how marginalized you are in society based on your immutable characteristics gives you more access to truth and gives you more power to speak on certain things. Jews feel uncomfortable with that point of view. We feel uncomfortable with the worldview that marks things like meritocracy and hard work as white supremacy, because those are things that have kept our community going and succeeding for decades and centuries. We feel our community grows up at the Shabbat dinner table. We're taught the value of arguing. We're taught the value of disagreeing. We're taught the value of, screaming at someone and, calling someone names and then sharing a dessert afterwards, because politics always came second to friendship and to family. In a world where that no longer exists, of course, we're going to feel uncomfortable. And of course, we're no longer going to feel at home.
Yeah, it's funny. When I came here 8 years ago, I, and like you said, like when we would have Shabbat dinner, we would be screaming about politics and this and that. And when I say screaming, like talking, but we just, we speak maybe a few decibels above what the average American at the Shabbat dinner.
That's my experience. I have a family of table hitters. where I can't even go.
Table
It doesn't
games.
even have to be a Shabbat dinner. It could be a casual bagel with cream cheese at the breakfast table, and one person will bring up taxes, and someone will have to get up from the table, and because they're so frustrated with the other person saying, I mean, that's my childhood in a nutshell. Hanukkah dinner, Thanksgiving dinner, there was food flying across the table, and someone would storm out and say, we're leaving, because there was so much anger and disagreement. And I was so excited to experience that when I got to college, and I was like, I can argue with people, I can debate people, and that is accepted and celebrated in this academic environment. And I realized very quickly that it was not, which was not only an affront to my, intellectual capacity, but also to my Jewish heritage, which, I mean, the Talmud is just people, kibitzing and disagreeing with one another. So it's very much cooked into our peoplehood.
And even like, I almost see it as a sport, as a, like a basketball game. You go and you play for, a ball game with your friends. You lose, you win, whatever. You slap hands, and you're all good. Even though maybe you're pissed because you lost at the moment, but you're still friends. It's still all good. It's the same thing when you talk with parents, cousins, friends that are sitting. You'll disagree, you'll scream, and then it's like, all right, should we move over to watch some news and with the dessert? It just it ends right there. And when I got to the U.S., I started getting very passionate about a lot of different things, from animal rights to environmentalism and climate change and veganism. And I was also like super lefty, super progressive. And I would argue with people, and I noticed they would shut down very quickly. And that's not what I wanted. It's not like I wanted to impose my thoughts. I was just so used to having a back and forth.
Yeah.
And when I saw them shut down, I was like, oh, okay, this is a different culture. And I adjusted myself. And now I for many reasons, but now I rarely get into these type of conversations / debates / arguments with people anymore, because it's just not worth it.
Yeah. And, when you have a generation marinating in social media, I guess the perception is that social media diversifies our thinking and allows us to see how other people in the world, I guess, perceive their reality and comprehend things politically. But in fact, it's done the opposite, because, of course, we all fall into echo chambers and filter bubbles where we're only seeing what we agree with, and the people that we agree with, the algorithm just pushes their thoughts and their opinions back into our faces. And so we don't need to interact with anybody else, because we have everything, we want to reinforce our worldview right at our fingertips. And so this generation is not better at arguing, is not better at debating. It is not better at free speech and at seeing the world differently and in shades of gray. It's better at sticking to your guns and holding, anybody who doesn't agree in contempt and branding them with labels that, they're the worst person ever. And by the way, this is true on the right and the left. This is, the left gets a little bit more heat for this, I should say, because we're the people who always champion free speech and freedom of expression. And so it's a little bit of a betrayal of our values. But we forget that, the right has been doing this forever. The right has been closed-minded and standoffish for forever. And they're falling prey to this, too, in the form of QAnon, where their closed groups with no diversity of opinion just get progressively more batshit and conspiratorial. And also, people involved in groups on campus like, YAF, which I think is Young Americans for Freedom, which is a stupid acronym, and Turning Point USA, they're very set in their ways too, and believe, all liberals to be screechy communists. So and as so the parties polarize, so the fingers start pointing toward the Jews. So this is a problem across the board.
Yeah, I feel like the right, though, the groups that you mentioned, as batshit crazy as they are, they don't generate the type of mainstream consensus and acceptance as the left groups do. But the left groups will get more acceptance in the form of corporations that bankroll them and that are happy to show them on their pages. Governmental, Hollywood, all they just get more attention, more acceptance. Where the right, the fringe ones, all these batshit crazy ones that you just referred to, and others, there's plenty of others as well. They are kind of there. That's like most people will just accept that. Yeah, they're just batshit right-wing fringe groups, and they're going to stay right there on the fringe.
I think that's true to an extent. I think the left definitely has a stranglehold on the culture right now. Like, as you said, in regards to Hollywood, media, corporations, suddenly wokeifying themselves. Like, this stays between us, he says on a podcast. It doesn't stay between us. I don't care who hears it. But like, I mean, yeah, like you go into Target and you see like, rainbow flags and trans flags. And it's like, can I just get my fucking I'm just here to get toilet paper. Like, I don't need you celebrating,
Not everything has to be politicized.
Not everything has to be politicized.
They want to show that they're on the right side.
Yeah, but it's so ridiculous. I mean, that's what, but it emboldens the right. It emboldens the right, because they see the culture slipping away from them and they're growing panicked about, the gays taking over. I mean, I saw a rainbow flag above TSA in Newark a couple weeks ago, and I was like, what? Like, why is that necessary? But I mean, I know I'm being glib and whatever, but all this to say, I do believe you're correct. The left has a very strong grip on the culture right now, but I also think it's a mistake to say that, the right is fringe. The right is, people acknowledge them. People think they're crazy. They're never going to have any real power. I think as frustration grows with the left because of this sort of pivot toward extreme identity politics, you're going to see it more likely that the right gets power, which is what happened in 2016, and Baruch Hashem did not happen in 2020. And we can't brush that off the table because they do have very dangerous ideas, and I believe their values and their worldview is very pernicious and threatening to liberal democracy. And so, I am a very big believer in the center must hold, regardless of how left I must feel on certain issues like abortion or climate change or income inequality. I am more focused on spending my time advocating for the center and advocating for centrist politicians and for people who can usher in an age in America where politics is not the most important thing, to discuss with your friends and family, and politics. And in a time where, the threshold for political violence is not nearing, a possibility or a probability. So
who's a centrist politician that you would promote?
I love Pete Buttigieg. I know Pete Buttigieg is in the Biden administration now, and I have, a whole lot of problems with the Biden administration that we can talk about at another podcast. But I love Pete Buttigieg. I like, my senators in Arizona, Mark Kelly, Kirsten Sinema. But, and of course, Republicans, who are willing to stand up to Trump. I liked John McCain. I'm from Arizona. I like John McCain.
Yeah.
I like Mitt Romney sometimes. I like him when, he stands up to Trump and Trumpism. I don't like him when he, votes more conservative than I want him to.
Yeah.
What is that? Adam Kinzinger? Is that his name? I don't think. He's a kind of a contrarian Republican. He's not running again, which is tragic because he has pro-Trump money being flooded in his race. But he was a free-thinking person as well. I like Republicans who don't believe the big lie that Biden stole the election. And I like Democrats who haven't absolutely lost their minds.
Yeah.
Who's Ted Deutsch in Florida? I like him a lot.
Oh yeah.
I like the Jewish Floridians. Yeah.
There's does the U.S. need another party? Because I feel like you got 50 million citizens and you have two big parties. There is absolutely no way that two parties can represent fairly and adequately such a huge population. There's got to be, and in my opinion, there's got to be at least a couple of more parties just to spice things up a little bit, because you have Republicans and they're going more to the right, and you have Democrats and they're going more to the left. And like you said, there's this huge contingency of people in the middle. We're just like, what the hell? Like, who am I supposed to vote for? Like, I would love to vote for someone, but I just feel like I don't have any good options.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that the two-party system is a trap. I think the two-party system leads to more polarization, not less polarization like it did before. I mean, like really before 1980 or really before 1990, Steve Kornacki wrote a really great book about this called The Red and the Blue, which kind of blames House Republicans like Newt Gingrich for kind of starting the chaos and dumpster fire of an environment we find ourselves in now. But I agree with you that where two parties used to, not be completely differentiated from one another, there was always, conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans. In today's day and age, the two-party system is doing more to bring about hostility and animosity from one person to another, from one party to another than it's doing to fix that. I think that Americans need more options. Americans need more choices. I would love to see, first of all, I would love to see the Republican Party split first. Mm-hmm. I would love to see, the Trump and anti-Trump wings kind of break apart from one another. I don't think that's realistic at this point, because I think Trump has such a firm grip on the conservative movement to where it's really the Trump movement, and anyone who doesn't believe in him and the lies and fabrications that he espouses is not welcome, which is where, I always find it ironic that the right kind of carries on and on about left-wing cancel culture, which is of course a thing, but they have their own tyrant kind of policing discourse as well. Yeah. Their own tyrannical force policing discourse as well. And on the left, I would definitely like to see a split between, the more progressive radical wing and the more centrist, moderate, but still forward-thinking liberal wing. But whether I want it to happen and I think it's going to happen are two very different things, because I think the party machines are so robust and so well funded and so dead set on win, whatever the cost, and polarize the electorate, infuriate the electorate, frustrate the electorate, turn the electorate against each other. I think we're stuck with this for the foreseeable future. The amount of infrastructure and resources it would take to get a party that would actually be successful and competitive in an election is just, I don't know, that's the dream. But again, in politics, everything seems impossible until it happens, so who knows? Andrew Yang, listen, I'm not a huge Andrew Yang person. I think to have an
refreshing though.
He would be totally refreshing. I think to have a bold enough vision as I'm going to start a political party, you actually have to have some political experience under your belt, and you need to be kind of equipped with the strength in that department to begin with. For instance, if he was mayor of New York right now and he was like, I want to start a new party because Americans need another choice, then I would be a little bit more attentive. The fact that he was kind of a businessman who was so successful, maybe in some areas, maybe not, lost a bunch of races, and now is saying, I have a book, we need another party, is like, all right.
Yeah.
I'll wait.
The incoming mayor of New York City seems like a legit good person.
Yeah. I'm a big Eric Adams fan.
Yeah.
I think he's made some mistakes in the past. I think there's no denying that, but I think I'm optimistic about where he's going to take the city. I truly am.
Yeah. If you look at crime rates across the U.S. right now, they're skyrocketing. They're just skyrocketing, right? Like if murder, robberies, breaking and entering, homelessness, fentanyl, number one killer of, I forget the age range, something like 18 to 45. I think it was about 80,000 people. So substantially more than COVID.
Yeah.
So more people died of fentanyl than COVID. It's wrecking cities, and it's happening everywhere. It's Chicago, it's Philadelphia, it's San Francisco, it's LA, it's New York, it's Denver, most big cities. But a lot of the governors and mayors have kind of been blasé about it and like, no, this is good. This is reform. This is, which I don't know how it's humane to just let people die on the streets from just horrific things and let them sleep on the streets. That's not humane or progressive in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion. But there's kind of been a shift in the past few weeks. Eric Adams is one. I've heard the mayor of
San Francisco came out big against crime. Yeah,
Philadelphia as well. I heard him say he was anti-woke culture, and I believe he's a Democrat if I'm not mistaken. So there is a little bit of a shift happening. It seems like.
And you know what, Baruch Hashem, that shift better happen, and it better happen fast. Again, this city elected Eric Adams because crime is a problem, regardless of what skin color you are, regardless of what religion you are, regardless of how much money you have, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum. No one wants to leave their apartment with the fear of getting mugged or the fear of getting shot or attacked. And that's a fear that I have in New York City. Like, I have my own pepper spray. It was bad when I got here. I moved here a year ago to Brooklyn, to Crown Heights. And, I was scared sometimes. I had my own sort of run-ins where I had to go to the police station multiple times because I was hurt on the subway. It's bad. And you see videos coming out of San Francisco and, Portland, Seattle of
Seattle, yeah.
People ransacking like strip malls, shopping malls, and leaving, designer stores with thousands of dollars of products, or even like a CVS or a Walgreens, people just walking in and taking as much as they want and leaving. And, those are kind of theft crimes. No one gets hurt. But of course, there are instances where people are getting hurt, as you said, murders, muggings,
but that's
armed robberies.
They keep saying that no one gets hurt, but when they allow theft in San Francisco of up to, I believe it was $800, and no one checks, they're taking thousands of dollars worth of stuff in a bag. Those Walgreens end up shutting down. The people that work there, they lose their job. There are consequences.
Yeah. Well, you have what is it? Chesa Boudin? Is that his last name? Boudin?
Chesa Boudin. Yeah.
Chesa Boudin. Sorry, I never knew how to pronounce his name. Chesa Boudin, who is just, Jesus Christ. I know we're not supposed to judge anyone by their parents, but if you need background into why Chesa is such a left-wing, soft on crime, essentially emptying San Francisco's jails and turning the city into an infestation of crime, like robbery and thievery. His parents were like arrested and imprisoned for a far left-wing terrorist job where, people were killed. That's sort of neither here nor there, but it's this ideology of soft on crime, this ideology of, and by the way, the people who elected Eric Adams in New York were black working class people. If you look at a map of how New York City voted, pretty much all of Manhattan voted for Catherine Garcia. The very liberal, very, very progressive. Hold on, I'm actually gonna pull up this map right now just in case I don't get anything wrong.
Yeah. We like facts on the podcast.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm getting everything right. Okay, yeah. So it's extraordinary map, really, when you look at it. You see all of Manhattan vote for Catherine Garcia. Okay. You see the very liberal, progressive, disproportionately white, gentrified parts of Brooklyn, Queens, and also Lower Manhattan, the East Village, vote for Maya Wiley. You see the heavily Jewish, Southern Brooklyn, Southern Williamsburg, Lower East Side, and heavily Asian Flushing area of Queens vote for Andrew Yang. And then you see all of the Bronx and the, African-American parts of Brooklyn and Queens and Staten Island vote for Eric Adams. And so this woke ideology that, being more lenient on crime, on violent crime, or on any types of crime is more, progressive, or is more accepting and embracing of the narrative of people of color, is completely wrong, because those communities are the communities that are being hit by crime the most, because those are the most impoverished community. Those are the communities that are lacking the most resources. Those are the communities that need as much help as possible. And so it's a completely warped view of this problem.
Yeah, I'm going to give a very unpopular take that might piss a few people off, but
go for it. I trust me, you're not. Yeah, I'm the person to tell it to.
It seems like a lot of mostly white liberal folks who live in areas where it's mostly safe, probably in an middle to upper on the socioeconomic ladder, seem to think that they know what is best for African-American communities or other communities, and they make laws and they choose people into power and they make these decisions based on not firsthand knowledge, not talking with anyone, but just what they think based on, I don't know, whatever filter, whatever echo chamber that they listen to on Twitter or Facebook or maybe CNN. And that's how stuff kind of get you, because that's literally how it breaks down according to the map that you just said. They're like, oh no, this is the best thing. This is what we should do. We are, we're helping everyone else.
Right.
But the reality is completely, it's divorced from reality. It has nothing to do on the ground with reality.
Right. I mean, the working class of this country, and a really excellent book about this was just written by Batya Ungar-Sargon called Bad News.
I had her on the podcast. I love her. She's great.
Oh, she's wonderful. I had the opportunity to meet her a couple weeks ago as well. And her book is just wonderful as well. I mean, the working class of this country is so separated from what the educated elite thinks the working class wants in this country. Mm-hmm. The educated elite who are filling, our academies, our universities, who are filling the media, who are filling the progressive, I should say the upper ranks, the higher ups of the progressive movement, are so infatuated with, theory and about radical change and about systemic structural upheaval in order to make society more fair. They're obsessed with identity, immutable characteristics, race, gender, or maybe not immutable characteristics, but class warfare, challenging the rich, scapegoating the rich. And listen, I agree with redistribution of wealth and the rich paying higher taxes and a more equal playing field for everyone. But also it represents this profound out of touchness, quote unquote, out of touchness, that is condescending, that is patronizing. And that also, it's just not listening to people. What do people want? They want to have honest work. They want to have honest pay. They want to get up. They want to leave their apartment without being worried about getting shot. They want to put food on the table. They want to have a country that presents opportunity for their children. Mm-hmm. Those things. And when Democrats stick to those messages, lowering prescription drug prices, and not making it cost $1.8 trillion, making, community colleges, cheaper or tuition free, focusing on issues that everyday real people want to tackle and want the government to do and want the government to work for them. We succeed. One of the big things in 2018 that, made Democrats take back the House was coverage of pre-existing conditions, and because Republicans were trying to take that away. Yeah. When we fall into this MSNBC wormhole, of, this boogeyman of systemic racism, white supremacy, that is being blamed for everything. And, as John McWhorter says, takes away the agency of people of color and, constructs the essential being of this country as being, this horrible, awful place where opportunity is impossible and where we can't overcome our challenges and aspire to our better ideas. It's a really off-putting message. And I think one of the greatest examples of that, again, is the NYC mayor race, where you have this pragmatic former Republican cop, crush a field of Democratic participants. And by the way, I speak to, I had the opportunity to speak to many progressives in New York who I agree with on a lot of policy during that mayoral race, who said long before the polls closed, Adams is going to win. Because they were in touch with the community, they were on the ground, they were seeing people get involved with things like fentanyl and drugs. And by the way, I walk out in New York and I see the drug addiction every day. I see the consequences of drug addiction all the time. And, these progressives who we're talking to, who were so sure that Adams were going to win, were speaking to mothers of people who had died from overdoses. Mm-hmm. And they wish that there had been policies, there had been an attitude, there had been an ecosystem that was more principles and not this sort of free for all. Anybody can do whatever they want, and if you object, then you're some reactionary.
Yeah, and I've seen many, probably too many videos of interviews with younger people, probably around your age, and they ask them questions like, "So, is the U.S. the most racist country in the world? Is the U.S. the worst country in the world?" And obviously,
I live in New York. Anybody who says that the U.S. is racist or is just blatantly racist at all can walk outside of New York and see it's a miracle. It's a cosmopolitan miracle. I love this city because it's people from everywhere.
Yep.
And where does that exist? Besides maybe London. And it's insane. It's an absurd accusation.
The crazy part is, and again, I take these videos with a grain of salt. Everything can be edited, and I don't take anything as Bible. But when you see video after video, person after person, young people, I don't know, ranging maybe 18 to high 20s. And they all say the same thing. They all stick to the same script. The U.S. is the most racist, the most sexist, least amount of opportunities for immigrants. And then, okay, 1 second. So, you see a video after that of immigrants, usually older people, same question. They're like, U.S. is the best country in the world, the most opportunities, the least racist.
Yeah.
Is it perfect? Far from perfect. Nothing's perfect. Perfect. A utopia that you want to aspire to. But that tells me that there's two options. One, they've either been completely brainwashed, which could very well be true, or B, they've never traveled.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because when you start traveling the world, and I'm not talking about going to Switzerland or going to Norway or the finer places. Go to some other countries.
And by the way, Switzerland and Norway are not that diverse. Yeah.
No, not diverse at all.
Not that diverse places. And so, of course, they're so progressive and liberal is because they're all white people. They're all white European people. And that's like, I always joke, that's like, Portland and Seattle are such white cities, and yet they're, saying that like America's racist. It's like, your communities are essentially segregated because people of color weren't allowed to live there for the longest time. No, of course, it's
segregation now is very progressive.
Of course, yes, white caucusing they call it. Maybe it's just Portland's just a large white caucus.
Yeah.
No, of course, it's an absurd characterization. And look, I'm such a patriot. I love this country. That's another issue that I realized was a point of contention in college as well, where, I think that this country is a miracle and nothing is more suggestive of that than living in New York City, where all people, all cultures. This is why I really don't have any desire to make Aliyah, because I love this. I love New York. I love the diversity. I love the tapestry of human life.
You can mix it up, like 6 months here, 6 months, dude.
Totally.
Tel Aviv's amazing.
Baruch Hashem, inshallah. One day I will have the money and the power to live.
You're on your way.
Winters in Israel and summers in New York. That would be amazing. But again, the progressive world is just so out of touch. With immigrants in general, 2020, we saw the largest increase of Hispanic support for Donald Trump and of working class, inner city Black voter support for Donald Trump. How do you explain? And we saw the biggest shift toward educated suburban voters, white voters toward Joe Biden, toward the Democrats. How do you explain that when 2020 was the year of social justice, was the year of the great racial justice awakening? How do you explain those trends? You can't. Well, I can.
And on top of that, I saw a stat, and I believe it was 95% of Latin people Latin descent, hate Latinx or don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
Yet it's promoted everywhere as if it's consensus, when the majority of people are like, that's not for us. No.
Because it was an idea born out of the elite academic posse, of people who think that, Herbert Marcuse and Ibram X. Kendi and, Kimberly Crenshaw, those ideas are going to lead us into a brighter, more progressive future. And they're wrong. They're wrong. And it just makes resentment worse among white working class people when you tell them they have to read Robin DiAngelo instead of, giving them a reason to, support you in the next election. It just, It's a completely different, it feels like we're operating in completely different universes right now. I mean, so like Kyle, well, I'm not even getting to Kyle Rittenhouse. We'll save that for another podcast. We'll save that for another podcast.
We just skirt around that landmine.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not even going to bring him up now because he's doing shitty things that I don't like. I mean, he's sharing the stage with fucking Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene.
No, he's piggybacking off this recent, fame for no apparent reason. Like for whatever the results were of his trial, like you really should, like celebrating just feels bad.
It feels bad. It's it's hard.
It's a bad look.
It's a bad look. It made me, during the trial, I was, I'm a big listener of Barry Weiss's podcast. And, you have, two left of center people, or Barry Weiss probably considers himself a centrist now. But you have Jesse Singal and Barry Weiss, talking about this trial, talking about the rule of law. And it made me understand the situation in a much more nuanced, gray way than listening to Joy Reid say that he was a neo-Nazi vigilante. Not saying that she exactly said that, but that was a general misinformation on MSNBC. The same misinformation, by the way, about Glenn Youngkin's win in Virginia, where apparently anybody who voted for Glenn Youngkin was a Klansman, ignoring the very real problems with the Democrats' proposal and Terry McAuliffe's campaign. And so, I had a contrarian opinion there where I felt like I was operating in a completely different universe than, my political compatriots. But then Kyle Rittenhouse shares the stage with Lauren Boebert and, does this ridiculous press tour, with conservative people whose beliefs I find repugnant. And so I have to shut up about that now. And I can't talk about it either because he's a little shit, so it's like, I can't win. I can't win. I can't win.
All right. So let's do a sharp move, away from that. I actually wanted to bring up a article that you shared. I believe it was you that shared this, the Teen Vogue article.
With Hanukkah?
With the girl who was kind of, she didn't know how to come out, air quotes, to her grandparents, who I believe were Holocaust survivors, come out in the sense that she is anti-Israel and she doesn't believe in all these things that they believe in. And it goes back to what we were saying about this younger generation. I see like there's a lot of, I'm not on TikTok, but I do see these things shared on Twitter where a young kid will like do something like, I don't know, come out as gay to their parents and then doesn't give the parent like a second to absorb it, but they'll just put that video to blast or shame the mom or the dad. And it's just like, I don't think that's the win you think it is. Maybe in some circles, you're like hailed as some champion of something. But for me, it's like this notion that everyone has to comply and accept you right away. And you don't give them a second to just digest and then go and you blast them and shame them on social media is one of the worst aspects of TikTok. And there are many bad aspects of TikTok and this young generation that everything is just so of the moment. And then if I go back to this thing, it's just like this young girl who I'm assuming was very, had a very comfortable life, probably very sheltered, privileged, didn't really need to address any real issues in her life. I'm assuming, I don't want to generalize, but probably. She is telling her grandparents who went through the Holocaust, survived the worst things in life with all that wisdom and life experience and the things they've seen. She kind of looks down on them. I'm like, who the fuck are you to look down at these people that like survived the worst and have? It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I mean, it shows you just the privilege of young Jewish anti-Zionists and the superiority complex they have and the narcissism they have in thinking that the entirety of Jewish history led up to them. and that, or
I am the pinnacle.
I am the pinnacle. I am the most enlightened Jew who ever lived. Me in the Upper West Side, drinking my caramel macchiato with all of my friends, not really dealing
You
with
don't know the struggles I've been through.
Right. Yeah. Not dealing with any really anti-Semitism on the street because none of us are very religious or practicing of Judaism. So we don't look visibly Jewish, but we are the pinnacle of Jewish civilization arguing against Israel's right to exist on our college campuses. I mean, it's just privilege. I mean, I don't remember her grandparents being Holocaust survivors. I
could be wrong about that.
But I remember her grandfather being a rabbi of like 37 years. And I just remember thinking like, you have the chutzpah to lecture a rabbi of 37 years about Jewish values. I mean, it's just insane. It's like we are just a piece in the puzzle of the Jewish story. We are a blip. Our lifespans are so short in the long history and story of our people to think that, we are correct in thinking that dismantling our one assured mechanism of protection and self-determination is some form of justice. Mm-hmm. The amount of obstacles as a Jew you have had to have taken out of your way for that worldview to even, come about is astonishing. It's astonishing. So I thought that article was hilarious. I was like, wow, this poor girl. I was like, this poor girl. My grandpa would slap me across. Not really, but I mean, like,
my grandfather probably would.
I don't approach Jewish elders thinking that I know more than them about our community. Let's just say that. And I know a lot about the community, and I spend a lot of time talking and writing and thinking and discussing and reading about our community. And I don't approach it. Again, it's this Gen Z narcissism, this Gen Z entitlement of we know better. It's like, no, you really don't. Yeah. Yes, anti-Semitism on the rise. Yes, anti-Semitism is a growing problem. Yes, the far right and the far left, of course. But also, we are still very much in this holiday from history, where you do not, I can assure you, any problems you have with Israel as a nation state, you would rather have those problems than have no Israel at all. I can assure you of that.
Yeah, there was this video I saw the other day. Who posted this? Maybe Emily Schrader, about this guy talking. I think he was like a blogger or a journalist from Syria, and he's talking about how he would love Israel to come and occupy Syria, because he was talking about how he was saying essentially the Golan Heights, which is north of Israel, northern Israel. The Syrians who live there essentially have the best life in the world because they're not under Assad. Right, Bashar Assad. And I was just
not a fan.
Yeah, no, not a big dictator guy personally, but
no.
It was just kind of enlightening, refreshing to see something like that. But I want to read something to you that I read the other day, which is, it's so fascinating. Like when people say they really care about Palestinian issues, I call bullshit, because I don't believe them, because you don't care about Uyghurs in detention camps, and you don't care about Kurds, you don't care about Yemen, and you don't care about a lot of other peoples across the world that are going through things that are far, far, far worse. Zero attention on them. You care about and also you don't care about Arab on Arab crime and wars that are happening that are majority of deaths in the Arab world. Zero. You don't hear anything about that. It's only when Israel is involved, which, kind of tells me all I need to know. But I did read something the other day that I thought was very interesting, and I'll just take a second because I'm not going to remember the whole thing, so I just wrote it down. It looks as though the world is preoccupied more with the Palestinians than any other unfortunate ethnic group in the world combined. But that is only an illusion. The world isn't really interested in them. The Palestinians only interest the world when they can point an accusatory finger at Israel. Case in point, that's right. The most oppressed group of Palestinians in the world, close to 500,000 people, according to UNRWA, is living in Lebanon. Lebanon went even further when it complemented the decision with other draconian laws that prevent the Palestinians from earning a living in a long list of professions, restrict them from living in refugee camps, and deny them access to the public school system. Put it in clearer terms, that is apartheid for all intents and purposes. The Arabs who made their way from Palestine into Lebanon were not foreigners. They share their same language, same culture, same religion. Nevertheless, they were subjected to apartheid that was anchored in law. Despite that apartheid, we never hear or see any protests. Every once in a while, a paper gets published by a human rights organization, but that's where things end. That's wild.
I don't have anything to add. The Palestinians are a weapon of war that the Arab world has used against Israel.
Yeah,
it's complete propaganda. The Palestinians have been abused by the Arab world and kept in their position because of the Arab world. Because they are a chess piece in their long and hopefully soon ending, we have glimmers of optimism, war against Jews declaring themselves as a sovereign minority anywhere in their midst. It's a tragedy, but again, this tragedy is only exploited if it can be used to hurt Israel and if it can be used to demonize and criticize Israel.
Yeah.
And so I don't really have anything to say other than that, other than, I think once people understand that about the conflict changes for them. Americans, especially Americans on the left, portray the conflict as so one-dimensional, and Europeans on the left, of course, portray the conflict as so one-dimensional, as so black and white, because they like to impose, our own problems onto a place that is miles and miles away, that adheres to none of the rules that American civil society does.
True.
But they impose our own problems on this place, and they see it as one-dimensional. Jews versus Arabs. The Jews have a upper hand, and so they are imposing apartheid and imposing oppression on these people. When in fact, all you have to do is zoom out and look at a map of the Middle East and see. I never like to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict unless I have an enormous map of the Middle East behind me to point out just how absurd it is that you are blaming these people for why these people don't have as much rights and as much freedom as they should. Not to say that I'm a fan of the occupation, not to say that I don't believe there's an occupation, not to say that I'm a fan of the settlement project, I don't believe in a two-state solution, because that's not even relevant at this point, to just realize what is the problem on the ground and why was it started and why is it continuing. And that is because ultimately the Arab world has never for a second unanimously accepted the Jewish right to freedom in that area of the world. And the Palestinians are just collateral damage.
100%. I mean, look, every time there was a potential for peace, Israel did something, right? There was we gave back parts of Gaza. We gave back Sinai with Egypt. There was Abraham Accords, right? Which is a massive deal, like peace with other Arab nations. It's always good. It's always good for the region. It's good for Israel. It's good for diplomacy. It's good for peace. It's good for financial prosperity, et cetera, et cetera. And because Trump did it, that's never mind. It didn't get the praise that it should have, because peace is always good. But yeah, if I think if I can leave people with one thing, it's that the majority of people in Israel would love, I'm telling you this 100%, would love to have peace with Lebanon and go into Lebanon, would love to have peace with Syria and be able to go into Syria and Gaza and all these areas in the West Bank. They would love it.
Yeah.
And I think when there's a willing partner on the other side, it'll happen. I don't know if it will, but if the day comes where there is a willing partner, I believe that it will happen.
Yeah. Baruch Hashem, inshallah.
Wait, thank you so much, man. You are a bright star. I think I'm really happy to see you're very young, but you're articulate and funny and smart. And I hope there's going to be more and more people like you that are have the courage to speak up, man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliments, and I really hope so too. I've been, marinating in this world of young Jewish activism for a while, and I think there is reason to be optimistic. I think this generation is a lot smarter than some of the older people give us credit for.
Yeah, for sure. Where are the best places to find you? Where can people follow you? Just plug it in.
Well, the best places to find me are outside any random bagel or deli below 14th Street in Manhattan. So if you find yourself,
I heard there's a cream cheese issue though.
yes, but I think it's resolved now. I think it's been resolved, which is good because that would have been I don't know. I think that would have been too emotionally taxing for me to just get through the day every day. But I think it has been resolved now. But if you're looking to find me outside of New York, which is rare, you can find me on social media at Blake Flayton everywhere and anywhere. And also follow my organization, the New Zionist Congress, at New Zionists on Twitter and at New Zionist Congress on Instagram. And make sure to check out my recent articles on the Jewish Journal as well. I guess at the Jewish Journal as well. They're all available online and some pretty interesting work, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, guys, be sure to follow Blake. And Blake, thanks so much for your time today. I had a blast, man.
I had a blast too. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, take care, bud.
Thank you.